Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, no matter where you are in this fine land of ours. I am so pleased that you've taken time out of your schedule to join us today. How are you doing, folks? My name is Daryl Prail, and I'm going to be your host today. And today we're having a very interesting conversation. It's all about the future of the CFO. When you read that, you kind of wonder, does that mean that there is going to be no CFO in our future? Like, what does that mean? And the reality is, it's not that at all. It's really, what is the future role of the CFO? In other words, is the CFO's role evolving? Is it staying static? What's going on? Or said another way, should the role of the CFO change and evolve to meet the needs of scaling, growing startup entrepreneurial companies who are striving for that massive success that they all hope for and strive for? So that's today's conversation. Sit back and relax. Some housekeeping things that you need to know. Let me get through that for you. First off, everybody's muted, so we can't hear you. And that's actually kind of nice. That means you can be in a bit of a noisy environment. You could be in a coffee shop. You could be in an open concept office, and you're not bothering anybody on the call here. So that's fantastic, and we love that. But the downside of that is we can't hear you, and we really do want to hear from you. And in fact, we encourage your participation. We want your questions because we've assembled quite an interesting panel here. So to do that, it's really straightforward. When you joined, there was a control panel in your upper right-hand corner provided by the platform we're using to host these webinars. And it's really straightforward. All you can do is type in a question, hit send. I mean, how simple does it get, right? So any question you have for anybody on this show, any of the panelists, about this topic, just send it. Now, there's one caveat. We don't actually answer the questions until the end because we get a lot of really cool, great stuff to get through here. So stick around and physically wait to the end. You will get your answer, and you can do follow-on questions, whatever you want. There's no limit to the questions you can ask. Just knock yourself out. So that's how this whole thing works. Now, if you're listening on demand, meaning you missed the live event and you're saying, I still want to ask questions, not to worry, we've got you covered there. You're going to see that we're going to share the email addresses for each one of our panelists, and you can reach out to them individually at any time as you're watching this and give them your feedback, your thoughts, and ask your question then. So we've got you covered both ways. That's how the process works. A little more, people always ask, is this being recorded? The answer is yes, it is being recorded. As long as you understand that, that's fantastic. The second part is, will we get a copy of the recording? Because there's a good chance I'm going to want to share this with some peers. And the answer is yes. Within about a week's time, often sooner, it will be in your inbox and you can share it, you can watch it, you can download it, you can listen on the commute, whatever it is you want to do. We encourage you to share it on social media with all your network. The same thing, though, if you miss that link for whatever reason, you can always go to the positiveventuregroup.com website, and it'll be there for playback whenever you want, along with all the other content we have there. So that's the way that works. Finally, I mentioned my name is Daryl Prail. I'm your host today, and that's my job. And my job is to make sure that Jason, Code, and Corey have a fantastic dynamic conversation about what we're talking about today. So, who is Jason, Code, and Corey? Great question. Let's meet these people. First up is Jason Burke. Jason is a partner with Positive Venture Group. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Happy to be here.
All right. For context of our audience in today's conversation, tell us a little bit about Positive Venture Group and maybe your role.
Thanks very much, Daryl. Positive Venture Group is a boutique investment advisory firm. We're made up primarily, our partners are all former C-level executives in a variety of startup growth phase organizations. But we've taken it one step further from just being augmentation at that C-level. We actually do outsourcing of full functions. So we have a finance outsource group, and we also have a marketing outsource group. Some of the areas that oftentimes are kind of lacking in a lot of the startups that we work with, we can fill gaps and help them kind of reach that scale that you were talking about a little earlier.
So, for the conversation, almost all your work is with startups. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say about 80%.
80% of it, right? So you've got a real close and upfront, shall we say, viewpoint on the trials, tribulations, and successes required to grow and succeed.
Yeah, I think that being involved in right now, I think we're working with about 30 different startups across the group that we have, and across a variety of different, everything from ideation through to Series B type companies. So we've got a good view of what they've done well, what they are not doing so well. We've got a lot of lessons learned, and we can always bring more of those to bear as we work with new companies.
All right, so the next person up is Code Cubit. He is the managing director at Mistral Venture Partners. Now, Code is interesting, right? Because every entrepreneur needs to grow their company, and of course, that often requires external financing, which is where Code comes in. So, Code, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Daryl.
Tell me a little bit about Mistral Venture Partners and what you guys do, where you specialize, maybe your role there.
Sure. I'm the founder, managing director at Mistral. We're a early stage venture capital firm. We invest solely in technology companies, so very high growth. We're the first institutional investor in the majority of our companies. We invest when companies are somewhere between 5 and 15 employees and maybe a year or two old. And we invest throughout North America, but we focus on Canadian companies, specifically, Ontario or Quebec based.
And would it be fair, Code, for me to say that as an investor, to minimize, shall we say, some of the risk associated with the investments you make, you have opinions and input onto the structure of the organization and how they are assembled for most chances of success?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're the first investor in, and a big part of our role is making sure that the companies have the right team in place to scale as they grow. And in the context of this conversation, having a CFO or a finance control is critical. We've found over the years to making sure companies are going in the right direction.
All right. Now, of course, it's a nice segue to the CEO. And we have our CEO on this webinar today. It's Corey Gross. He is the CEO and co-founder of Sensible. Corey, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Really happy to be here.
Now, for the audience, tell us a little bit about Sensible and what you folks do.
So yeah, Sensible is a 4-year-old fintech startup based out of Toronto, Canada. What we do is we provide expense capture and management services to financial institutions that they can then pass this on as a value-add service to their banking customers. So effectively, we allow consumers to capture and manage receipts that help them with everything from their taxes to their expenses if they're a small business, to even just reminding them when a return or warranty might expire and they may need to take action on that. We've grown the company over the last few years to over 60 people now. We've raised over $20 million just about in venture capital and are eyeing global expansion.
So I guess it's a fair statement to say is you being the co-founder and the CEO, you have a very close and personal track record, life experiences on what it takes to get the company off the ground, to get it funded, to put the right team together. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is build the best possible team to increase our chances for success.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Our panel consists of Jason, who understands everything about these startups and has been there, done it himself. Code, who represents the investment community. And Corey, who is probably someone like you, leading a startup company and trying to grow its firm. Let's get into it. Today's agenda. It's pretty interesting. So this all comes from an article that appeared recently in Forbes magazine, and we'll share the link when we send the actual recording of the webinar today for context so you can read it. But the big gist is that there is a documented, surveyed, bona fide results that show that the role of the CFO and what they're doing is actually at odds. There's a disconnection between what the CEO expects them to do and what they're actually doing. I can maybe phrase that statement differently. What the CEO needs them to do, what the investors need them to do versus what they're actually doing. So why is that? Well, that's because you're going to learn today the CEOs have set a bar that's quite high for that CFO, and not every CFO is up for the challenge. It's more than just the books, it's the big picture. But beyond that, whenever there's money involved, and depending on the industry you're in, there's also a regulatory burden. And then there's also the impact of technology. And of course, it wouldn't be, a full 360 on the individual if we don't talk about their people skills. All important attributes. Let's get into it. We're going to set the stage here. I'm going to go with you, Jason, to kickstart this conversation. According to the Forbes article, it says that almost 3/4 of CEOs from high-performing companies believe that the CFO's role will increase in importance more than any other C-suite role. More than that's ruling out marketing, sales, even your technology officer. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with it, because this comment is really a lot about scaling, right? And when you talk about scaling your business, you're really talking about people, process, and systems. And when you're talking about people, the HR responsibility oftentimes is something that the CFO is responsible for, and making sure that we have the proper people processes in place. Cross-functional processes often are designed and implemented by the back office to support front office initiatives to make sure that silos don't come into place. So again, the CFO has to be a process strategist to be able to implement scalable processes for an organization. And once again, on the system side, oftentimes the IT requirements of an organization fall into the CFO's responsibility. So if we're trying to grow a business and we're trying to be scalable and we're trying to implement best practices, a lot of that will roll right through the CFO. And on the back side of that, of course, to be able to do all of that, you need to be able to afford to do all of that. So there's the whole funding aspect. And every time that you go out for a new funding round, there's a new set of challenges that come with it. There's new stakeholders and new investors. There's new expectations on ongoing reporting. So that role as the steward of the organization and the reporting organization for the company is something that the CFO has to be able to take advantage of. And if I just jump one more step into this, all of that is stuff that the CFO has to do. But when you think about where the organization is going and my view of the role of the CFO, it really is the CEO is normally the one who sets the strategy, and the CFO's role is to become the caretaker of that strategy, which means that the CFO actually has to step into a position where they're saying, okay, this is where we want to go. This is what we want to do to get there. Well, how do we align execution to that strategy so that we actually de-risk our chances of getting there?
Jason, do you think, in your experience, that most individuals who are in the CFO role today would agree with that roles and responsibilities that you just described?
I think a lot of people who have been in the CFO role will say that a lot of what I just described is what they should be doing. But I've seen in a lot of other cases where they are asked, okay, well, how much of your time should you be spending on strategy? And they'll say 80%. How much time are you spending on strategic initiatives? And they'll answer 20%. So a lot of times people have this tendency to revert back to where they're most comfortable. And a lot of CFOs come from an accounting background or a pure finance background. Some do come from other angles, but for the most part, they come from that background. And they oftentimes will find themselves reverting back into that and spending their time in that area, which is probably the thing that's least valued by the CEO and the rest of the business.
So, Corey, I'm going to flip it to you. You're our CEO on this call. Have you set a high bar for your CFO? Do you believe your CFO will be potentially the most important C-level role in your team supporting you as a CEO?
I think they're definitely a partner to the business is the best way I can describe the role of the CFO. And much to echo Jason's point about them being the executor of the strategy that the CEO and the executive team have laid out, very much rings true for the way we see our business. In terms of the bar being set a certain level, I think when you're an early stage company, what typically happens is that you think of the CFO, or who should be the CFO, as the guy who came out of school with an accounting degree, right? Or maybe the guy who just got their MBA but has an accounting background. And that a CEO does not make. I just think being able to control the basic accounting of the company is a lot different than being the controller, the financial controller. And that's a lot different from being a CFO. And so I think that's where you see that dissatisfaction or that misalignment in terms of the expectation of what a CFO is meant to do versus the capability and experience that they have, and not being able to accomplish that. So yeah, we absolutely see the CFO as a partner and someone that can help execute on the business strategy. But I think the gap is that there's too many startup CFOs that aren't truly, that haven't truly grown into that role yet and don't have that experience, and therefore can't contribute some of those core aspects that that Jason's described, and certainly what you see being talked about here.
So let me ask this question, because you had said at the start that, Sensibill is 4 years old. So your role, your expectation of that role, has it changed from say when you're 1 year or 2 years or 3 years old versus today?
I think early on, we didn't think that we needed a CFO. What we really needed was someone to get our books in order, and for someone to be able to make sure the back office wasn't falling apart, that we can, take care of payroll and accounts receivable and accounts payable, that kind of stuff. That was what was more important than having, a stability and experience in a CFO or controller position. But as you grow, as you said, to a bit of a larger company, larger than 3 to 5 people, you start to realize that function is unwieldy for people that A, don't have the experience, and B, just don't have the capability of executing on it. As we've grown as a company and we've looked at things like international expansion, what does that mean? What do we need to do? Do we need to incorporate in another country? Can we, stay as a Canadian held and operated company and just deliver services in these different places? All of the questions that need answering that we just don't have the experience to deal with, that's when you kind of need a higher level of execution intelligence, I would say. And so I think the role of the CFO has evolved, and the needs that we would have for that a person in that role have evolved as we've grown. And most certainly, we see it as being a key piece for us as we grow.
So, Code, as you kind of read this slide and you listen to Jason's perspective, and you hear Corey's, shall we say, his growth and how the role has evolved at Sensible and his expectations as CEO, what's going through your mind as, in your role as an investor in early stage companies?
So I think, maybe a little bit provocative, but I think it's a function of stage, and Corey laid it out pretty well. I don't think the CFO is the most important C-suite actor early on. I think later on in a fully mature company, I think the CFO is number 2. There's no question about it. They're the alter ego of the CEO. In fact, if you think of the CEO as the gas pedal, the CFO is the brake pedal, and you need both to drive the car. In the early stages, I'm a strong proponent of an outsourced CFO who can give you the counsel and experience, but you don't need to have them full time. So, and I would separate that obviously from the controller and sort of financial bookkeeping stuff. Obviously, Positive Venture Group is a great example of this, where you get CFO wisdom, but you only get it half a day or a day a week, because that's all you need at the earliest stages. And as you grow, you need them more and more. I guess early on this slide, I would say that the second most important C-suite is either operations or sales and marketing. But then that fades as the company grows.
And when you have that conversation with your CEOs that you're looking at investing in, the companies you assess, are you seeing that alignment with what you just said? Or does the idea, for example, of a virtual CFO, a half day, a day a week, that premise to give that skill without the cost of a full-time CFO, does that even cross their mind?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe Corey can have a better opinion on this than me, but I think at the earliest stage, what we look for is at least 2 senior level, call it C-suite folks in a company, if only because a startup is a lonely place to work. And if you're alone and you're the only C-suite person, it's tougher. But generally speaking, we see a CEO who's kind of the visionary, and a CTO or CMO or sometimes a COO, but it's another function other than CFO, at least in the early stages. So what we recommend generally is, again, a sort of seed stage Series A is a part-time CFO who can give you that leadership, but your full-time people and your full-time resources should be directly either selling or building the product.
All right, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and just building off of what Code said, and I would agree. I think the role of the CFO through this scaling period that we're talking about, one of the most important things they can do is help remove distraction. When people ask, I'll often tell them that for a startup to get off the ground, it takes 5 years and $5 million at least to get the company up and running. That fundraising is a distraction. A lot of the reporting that goes along with it can be a distraction. Systems implementations and conversions can be a distraction. International expansion and where you're expanding to and how you set it up, all of these things are going to draw time away from those core executives that Code just talked about. You want the guys, like companies are normally set up to build product and sell product, and or offer and deliver a service, not to do the things that I just described, which are really more back office. So having an experienced individual in the CFO role who can help guide those things and remove that distraction so that the CEO and or the COO don't have to get dragged into it is probably the biggest value a CFO can offer.
All right, we're going to move on to the next slide now. And I just want to remind our audience that if you have any questions at all, any comments, use the question function. Send us those questions. If they are questions, we'll ask them of our experts at the end. If they are comments, we will share. For example, we just had one of our audience members say that they see the CFO as a validation to the CEO's vision in early stages as well. So keep that conversation going. Next up on that Forbes article, it says 32% of CEOs say their CFOs does not understand and assist them with the challenges that they face with running their organizations. I don't know who to ask here. I want to go to Corey as the CEO. So Corey, let's not worry about now. All right? I don't want to throw any of your executive team under the bus now, but let's go back maybe a couple years ago when you're still growing and emerging and figuring it all out. Were there times when your CFO might not have understood or assisted you as much as you'd hoped?
We didn't have one. I think what we did was we had somebody who was willing to roll up their sleeves, get into the weeds as a more of a controller function. And we, I think, as Coach said, we were fairly self-aware of when we may have needed that role, and so we allowed ourselves to organically mature into having a more formal CFO function. I would say that our expectations early on is that you do what you got to do for us to move forward and make sure the house doesn't burn down. But we're really investing in marketing and technology and product, all of the things that we need to do to just get started. And we figured that if we were fortunate enough to execute and do a good job, we would earn the right to work with an experienced CFO, because the problems and the challenges they want to solve for are, in my view, growth challenges and problems, right? I mean, there are certainly some people with a lot of experience in the CFO role that like to get in early in a startup, roll their sleeves up and execute along with the other first few employees. But we figured that we had the people that could do that in different functions, or at least get us to a point where we would need to get to. But yeah, the CFO was someone that we staged for Series A and beyond if we were able to get there. And since we've brought that person into the company, and he's helped us with exactly the types of problems that we think that we weren't capable of doing: growth, scale, and preparing for, in some ways, success.
So then in that early stage, where did you turn, Corey, when you needed counsel on the challenges that you were enduring, that you were experiencing, and you wanted that expertise? Where'd you go?
Yeah, well, you surround yourself with people who can solve your problems for today. And we have a saying that, not to be ignorant of setting ourselves up for future failure, but some problems are future Corey problems, right? And so for the problems that we had early days, we would lean on investors, advisors that we had built relationships with through our network, and just through even one of your early customers that you build a strong relationship with can be a strong advisor for you and helping you overcome challenges. So we surrounded ourselves with people who were helping solve our problems for yesterday, and certainly as we've grown, those problems have changed. So now you have a more experienced, full-featured CFO, so to speak, because they're helping you solve challenges that your early advisors and investors maybe aren't equipped to challenge, or they've kind of let you loose into the next phase of your growth, and you need someone to help, new people to help solve those things. Like advisors, I think, get a little bit outdated once you've got a certain amount of customer traction and maybe you've raised a decent amount of money. You've got to find the next people to help you along your way.
I have to say, Daryl, I'm a little surprised by the statistic. My feeling is the CFO is the Spock to your Captain Kirk, and they should be intimately aware of every part of the business, right? So they're not sort of relegated to sales and marketing or, engineering or operations. They really do perform the glue function across the organization, because they understand all the budgets and how people are paid and who can they afford to have, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little surprised that these CEOs are saying that. I mean, my observation is that they probably have the wrong CFO if they think they're not able to understand and assist. they should be intimately aware with everything, and they should be the sounding board and the confidant of the CEO.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Code. And what I see on when I read this, there's the people who carry the title CFO, and then there are people who are actually CFOs. And in early stage companies, oftentimes the title is carried by somebody who has not ever been a sitting CFO in an organization, or does not necessarily have that experience. Maybe somebody who was more of a middle level kind of finance person who's come in to kind of manage the books. Oftentimes that role is actually more of a controllership than it is a CFO, or it's even sometimes it's more of an operational role than a true CFO role. And as a result, I think this is the result, that even though the person's carrying the title CFO, it's not really a true CFO title. There's not really a true CFO with somebody who has the experience to do some of the things that Corey was talking about, or that you're alluding to. And certainly not only to be the Spock, but to also, in that role, also be able to kind of carry forward and kind of strategize about where the company's going and and bring to bear some of the best ways to get there, which is really a part of what the CFO should be doing. And a lot of times they're caught looking backwards because they're more accountants than they are CFOs.
So if a CFO becomes CEO, are they both Spock and Kirk? Just curious how that works. All right, next up, the big picture. All right, so this is something that CEOs value the most. Big picture thinking and a strategic approach. In this survey, by 49%, half of them said that was one of the most important attributes for your CFO. And what's interesting, because that was one of the things that, Jason, you alluded to in your overview earlier on, the role of the CFO. You definitely spoke to that. I'm going to start with Code here first, though, because Code, you said earlier on you're thinking maybe the CMO or COO, but you didn't say CFO. Do you agree with this stat, or are you of that 51%?
Well, I think this goes back to the idea that the CFO should be almost a mini CEO, without the sort of external facing requirements and challenges. And so, I think what this says is the CEOs are looking for them to be their validator, to be their co-conspirator, to be sort of everything they are, but sort of internally focused. So I think this makes sense.
And I think in my mind, when I read this, with the CFOs that we have at Positive Venture Group, one of the things that we've implemented is a CFO process. Because we want to make sure that things like this don't fall off the table. So one of the first steps in that process is actually helping build that long-term business model on a basis that's actually something you can execute and measure yourself against and manage to. It helps kind of lay out kind of all the different hiring, all the different programs you're going to run, how you actually kind of drive the company forward, and link the goals that the CEO has set and that the management team has set to the actual execution within the business. It's a big part of this role for the CFO, and it's something that often, like I said, is not part of what CFOs employ in early stage organizations or growth stage organizations.
So let me segue on that and go back to Corey as a CEO. And I know you're in Toronto there, Corey. There's a phenomenal tech community. I'm sure you've talked to many fellow CEOs who are in companies like yours, fast, furious, growing. When you have those conversations with your fellow CEOs, do you find their CFOs are the big picture thinkers? Are they're providing that strategic counsel to your peers, the CEOs, or are they handling more of the traditional role of a CFO, which is, the finance, the books, etc.?
I think that what I see most of, to be quite honest, are people that hire, like I described, people with math or business backgrounds or accounting backgrounds that want to be a startup CFO. And they were the one who wanted to be the CFO of the group of founders if there's 2 or 3, so they're the CFO. And so their experience and their capability is very limited. And ultimately, once they realize that they need, certain problems to be solved that they can't solve for them, they start to look externally. They start to bring in consultants. There are a number of you see these advisory firms like Positive that are in Toronto. That they're everywhere. Every tech hub has a number of them, and they're there to basically say, well, we're the experience. We're the ones who have lived through growth. We're the ones who have lived through failure and know how to spot, in some cases, so know how to spot, a train heading toward going off the tracks. And so we're going to help you raise a Series A or Series B round, because your startup CFO, who is a co-founder of the company but's never really had a company before, is not going to be able to do that for you, or at least doesn't have the experience to execute on a plan as well as I might. And so that's what I see a lot of startup CFOs as very green entrepreneurs that want to serve the finance function or the accounting function of the early stage business. Now, I think once you hit a certain stage, once you're going for Series A money, once you're a growth stage company, you get pretty smart about it. And I think you start to say, like, hey, I don't have the capabilities on my team, so I need to look either to a positive or somewhere else to help me through this Series A, because I realize the business model that I'm going to have in place that charts a path for growth is very different than the one I cobbled together and hustled my way through during the early stages of our company. So I think for me, it's just seeing people who realize as they grow the business that, like any role in your company, your early stage, your first developer, software developer, is not a CTO just because he's the tech guy on the team. And I see that much the same way as a CFO. Just because you're the math and accounting guy doesn't mean you can serve those functions. And so that's unfortunately what I think a lot of people do. They succumb to title inflation and hire people that aren't fit to actually solve the needs that they're looking for long term.
Yeah, and
so, Daryl, let me add another comment here. If you flip this question around, CEOs value conservation oriented initiatives. That's just the wrong way for a CEO to think, right? Their whole job in life is to understand customers better than their CMO, to understand the product technology and feature set better than their CTO, and to understand, how big the market opportunity is better than their CFO. But then they rely on those functions, those C-suite folks, to understand, marketing tools, engineering tools, and for the CFO, the financial tools and financial wherewithal that they have at their disposal. So the idea is that the CEO says to the CFO, I want to go after, an Asia expansion or Europe expansion. The CFO's job is to say, look, our margins are down this quarter, and so we don't have the cash to hire somebody over there. And if we did it, through outsourcing or a relationship with a reseller or a distributor, it might be a better strategic way to go. That's the kind of counsel they want. It's not, show me the balance sheet and the income statement and I'll figure out what I can do with it. They're assuming that guy's coming to the strategic discussion with the context of the financial wherewithal of the business.
I think that's exactly well put. It's kind of what I talked about as the CFO being the partner to the business, the same way I see the operator, the COO or the CTO, very much that they are there to serve the vision of the business, right? But they have skills and experience and capabilities that obviously are more well-rounded than yours in those particular departmental or functional areas, right? So you'll hear great CTOs, for example, talk about how what they do should serve the business. It's not to just whip something up that's cool. It's to understand the business purposes for it and give the CEO and give really the company options for how to accomplish certain things. There's always going to be trade-offs and there's always going to be potential limitations, like in the example Code gave, but it's the CFO's role in the financial and really the growth example that Code provided to give options for how we could grow. Are we going to have to seek outside financing because our margins are down and we can't fund that expansion ourselves? Or we're going to have to, should we go look for venture capital? All of those things are sort of the counsel you expect from a CFO at a growth stage company.
Yeah, and I guess that puts the kind of context on, okay, well, this sounds like it's a pretty tough thing to fill because startups can't afford to hire a very experienced CFO. I didn't become a CFO until I was about 14 years into my career, all 100% focused on finance, being trained by some of the best organizations in the world, and it still took 14 years. So you're looking for that person who has that much of experience, but may not be affordable or needed full-time to service these organizations. So how does a startup actually achieve what this slide is kind of speaking to have that big picture thinking from a CFO. And a way that it's been done is that you actually, we talked about it before, you get the good advice from somebody who's there part of the time, not all of the time. You have somebody who can execute some of the strategies in-house. And then as you grow, you're trying to empower and train and teach the finance person who's in-house or the more junior finance person. And you're also potentially working towards a transition to a more full-time CFO, but you're basically giving the business what it needs from a CFO perspective as it grows. Unfortunately, there's not much training out there for how to be a CFO. I know there's a couple of courses that happen that you can take, but it's something that almost has to be experienced and worked through to get that training. And that's why, again, what we did was we built this process around what a CFO needs to do, so that we actually have some things to train our various CFOs so that we can deliver on a consistent basis. And this is something that we do pass on to when we're working with a controller in an organization. We work with them on the same basis so that they're learning and getting up to speed as we're kind of helping them along, whether they end up becoming that next CFO as the company grows, or whether there's somebody that's brought in on an interim and they continue to train and work their way up. I think it's important to have that kind of long-term thinking about how you serve this function. How do you get that support for growth-oriented initiatives into the organization when there are table stakes of just getting financial statements done and getting reporting done? So I think that striking a balance and finding a model that works for the company that you're in is pretty important.
All right, next question up. CFOs need to transform the regulatory burden into an opportunity. So 43% believe that the stringent regulatory environment is impeding the CFO's ability to focus on their other areas that Jason alluded to early on, that 80% versus 20% example of being strategic. 42% see that same regulatory environment as an opportunity to derive competitive advantage. So Jason, I'll come back to you since we just mentioned you and this is something you spoke to. What are your thoughts when you read this?
Yeah, I think this has been the long-time burden for finance professionals. And I can tell you that in the last couple of weeks, I've been having some really exciting, deep conversations about whether you treat a preferred share offering as debt or equity, or what is the proper rev rec treatment for certain types of transactions. And unfortunately, you still get dragged into those discussions around on the regulatory side, on what I referred to as the table stakes. But I'm just going to refer back, and I'm going to go way back in time here to around, I think it was around 2002 when Senator Sarbanes and Representative Oxley got together and created the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And all of a sudden put a whole new onus on public companies in terms of their internal control environment and documenting their internal controls and being auditable on those internal controls, where prior to that it was basically you put in place internal controls and then you just wouldn't really think about them again. You had them, but you never really wrote them down and never really tested them. And I remember sitting there with the CEO at the time. I was with Cognos. And when we were talking about this, the CEOs said, well, if we're going to be going out there and spending a lot of money to document all this stuff and we have no choice but to do this, then we should be using this. We should be using this as an opportunity to actually get some more efficiency into our process, standardize our process, and drive a higher level of and eventually optimize the processes that we're documenting. So it's that idea of taking what the regulation is requiring you to do and actually taking that and making it something that is a competitive advantage for the organization by driving efficiency and optimization into that process.
All right. So in the essence of time, I'm going to bring us on to the next slide because there was also the conversation around technology will be a make or break test for CFOs. And again, Jason, you talked about tech. The survey indicated that 63% of CEOs believe that tech will have the greatest effect on the role of CFO. I'm going to go back to Corey as the CEO. And how much does technology play with your vision of your CFO?
I am a firm believer that when it comes to technology replacing C-suites or even critical roles of a business. You just can't do that. I don't know if it means to say that it reduces the requirement for a CFO to be full-time against part-time. I think there's always going to be, cash flow management systems. There's always going to be QuickBooks and new, better, quicker ways of helping provide data and insights about a company's financial performance. But it comes down to a person to be able to provide, to use their experience and ability to make recommendations to the team. I mean, being a CEO and a COO and CTO have become, technology has enabled them to be better, for sure. And I think technology just enables the CFO role to be better when they have more data and more insight at their disposal to add value to the company. So I see this as, I don't know if it's a make it, break it. I think it's just technology is a tool. CFO is a role. Tools enable people to be better.
All right. Jason, is it make it or break it? That's where my eyes keep going to, and I got a kick that Corey brought it back to that.
Yeah, and I think this one's absolutely critical for a CFO to understand the technology infrastructure, because it can come back to haunt you. Corey mentioned some QuickBooks as an example. A lot of companies will start on QuickBooks, and that's a decent place to start. There's other early stage software packages like FreshBooks. But when you think about what companies will start doing, especially in this day and age with cloud applications so prevalent, they will grab QuickBooks to manage their accounting. They'll grab another one to manage their HR system. They'll grab another one to manage some of their reporting. They'll grab another one to do their cash flow management, as Corey mentioned. And then all of a sudden, they'll start building all sorts of Excel spreadsheets in and around them and start kind of cobbling together a reporting environment, a system environment without a plan, but it just kind of grows and evolves. And then as you get to a point in your business where you're actually hitting that gas pedal, you're crossing the chasm, you're starting to have all sorts of customers, you're starting to do really, really well, and you've got this momentum going in the business, and all of a sudden you hit that point where that volume breaks that cobbled together system that you've been putting together, and all of a sudden you have to go through a massive system conversion at that point in time and move everything over to a more stable environment, a more stable system. And it's just a difficult thing. It's one more distraction that the CEO and the other parts of the organization did not need when they hit that point. And it's all too common a story when it comes to technology. Technology is a tool to make our processes more efficient and more scalable, but you got to leverage the right types of technology at the right time. And now, in a day when everything's on the cloud, and there's normally, in a lot of early stage companies, there's nobody specifically responsible for IT and an IT strategy anymore, because everything's available on the cloud. The CFO has got to be the thought leader when it comes to what technologies to bring into the business and how to deploy them and how to make that company more successful and more scalable.
My goodness, there's a lot of CFOs and CEOs right now feeling a little uncomfortable as you went through that last discussion, because all of us have been there. I can relate to it. And we know it personally, how it has a dramatic impact on our success, especially when you're hitting that gas pedal. All right, people skills. I'm going to bring this one back to code. 80% of CEOs from high-performing organizations say that nothing is more important than talent management, but they also believe their CFOs can and should do a better job of managing their teams. Where does talent management and people skills come in on the role of the CFO to a company's success in your experience, Code?
Yeah, I don't see it being correlated at all. So, I mean, I agree with the premise. CEOs do put a huge value on talent, and that absolutely is true and should always be. I just don't know where the CFO has a lot of opinion there, candidly.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, one of the challenges is that label of a CFO. A lot of CFOs in growth stage companies, and this is with all due respect to my accounting brethren, there's a lot of accountants who basically grow up in an accounting firm. They're surrounded by type A accountants who are very career focused and driven and know exactly what they want, and they're very numbers focused and analytical, but they don't necessarily develop the people skills to bring the best out of a variety of different folks working across a bunch of different functions who have different career versus job objectives, who have different kind of expectations for what they want to get out of a company. And as a result, a lot of these people really, when they get into an organization for the first time after they've come out of an accounting firm, they really get hit pretty hard by those differences. I went through it. When I left the accounting firm after 7 years working with just accountants and then went into an organization for the first time into a finance function, and all of a sudden I had my accounts payable team or my accounts receivable folks who really just loved where they were really good at their job, but saw it as a job, not a career. We needed those people. And I didn't know how to get my head around people who weren't there to work 17 hours a day. It didn't really kind of jive with my way of thinking. And I really had to learn, okay, well, how do I adjust to make sure that we get what we need to out of the individuals who do have talent and skills? And those people skills are not things that are necessarily just there and apparent for a lot of the folks who come from that background. It takes a while to develop them in industry before you actually are more like the rest of the world, more like the CEOs and COOs of the world, and you start thinking the same way.
Corey, Sensibill is an interesting company because you are being incredibly successful. It's another Canadian success, but part of that is culture, right? And making sure the employees want to go there, because as you grow, you have to attract that people, and so they start looking up to leadership and how the teams are being managed. Do you look at your CFO as having a heavy influence in that culture and managing that talent and making sure that the infrastructure is in place to accommodate and to grow and to make sure you're able to meet your growth requirements?
Yeah, we start with three core values at Sensible. We start with passion, integrity, excellence. And we actually like to say we have a culture of pie. There's Easter eggs about pie all over the office. Whenever it's someone's birthday, we get them, pie of their choice that we enjoy with the whole team. So we started with values first, and that helped us identify the kinds of people we want to work with and the kinds of leaders we want to have on our team, right? We want people who are, like, as Jason said, get out of bed because they want to do something to change the world. They want to make an impact. They take a lot of pride in producing great work. We want people that are accountable to themselves, their team, and obviously the needs of our clients and our partners, and that are just great at what they do. They have the experience, they have the capabilities, they have the skill to execute. And when we especially onboard any executive role, the CFO being, of course, one of the key ones, they need to be very emblematic and an ambassador for those values. And so I think you build a culture absolutely through the people, and the leaders. People will follow the way the leaders act and the way the leaders set an example for them. But you find people and leaders based on cultural values that you identify are important to you. And so we basically facilitate the discussion on what does it mean to grow at Sensible, right? So Jason gave the example of, hey, listen, there's some people that are in an accounting or APAR function at a company. They don't live to work. They work to live, and they want to be there from 9 to 5. They'll put in good work, and they'll get along fine with everybody at the office. When they check out, they check out. And so that has an effect on how you grow talent and how you build a culture, right? If you want a culture where anyone can rise the ranks to be the next VP at Sensible, well, then you have to build systems and a process for helping people do that. But if you think that it's unrealistic to do that because there's only going to be so many roles to go around, and if you promise everybody the moon, you're just going to come off being disingenuous and therefore lacking integrity, then you've got to be very clear in terms of what the opportunities are so that you don't lead people astray. So I think this is my long-winded way of saying we started from values. We found a CFO that was a great ambassador for those values, and we let them install process and systems to help install our philosophy for talent and culture, and help us maintain that as we grow.
All right. Yeah, and just building on that, I think this is a perfect example for what we were talking about in terms of the CEO setting a strategy, and then how would the CFO come in and be the caretaker of that strategy. And Corey laid out some great examples of what are the values of the organization. Well, then those values have to be reflected in a lot of different kind of people-oriented processes. Some of them are the kind of town halls and the discussions, but it's got to be there in the hiring process. It's got to be there in the learning and development process. It's got to be there in the performance management process and the performance review process that's being implemented. It's got to be there in kind of the interactions and the policies that are put in place in terms of inclusion or diversity or other things like that. Like all of this has got to be reflected in the actual policies, processes, and systems that are deployed. And those are the things that the CFO can help bring to bear to support the organization. And then, of course, it has to be there in the organizational design itself. So all of those different things are things where the CFO should have a very material role in setting that up, in kind of de-risking the ability to achieve the pie values that Corey laid out.
All right, so we're going to move on to the questions now. And we got several that have come in. We'll try to squeeze in as many as we can while making sure we get you out of here at the top of the hour, no later than as promised. If you have a question, just go to the control panel, type in your question, hit enter. We'll get it. We'll ask our experts. If we run out of time, we will still send you answers after the fact using the email that you used to register with. So not to worry, we will take care of you that way. And as I did promise, we would share the email address of our panelists today. So that if you're listening to this on demand, then you can simply send your email and get the answers you want. All right, first question that has come in. Interesting question. I like it. And the question is this: in a startup, adjustments happen on a day-to-day basis, whether they're finance, product development, sales, whatever. So they're happening ongoing all the time. How can a virtual CFO react when they're part of the organization part-time? So Jason, I see you nodding your head. I'm thinking you have an answer already.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the what I'll call a little bit of an illusion in the world, is that the company changes completely on a day-to-day basis. The company can't change completely on a day-to-day basis, and there's got to be a more programmatic way to respond to things that change. A customer's reaction to a product may change. There might be individual items that change, but there is a strategy for the company. The company is executing in line with that strategy. There's got to be a process that maintains that execution on a consistent basis. And that's really how this role can fit in more part-time, because you shouldn't need to be there 24/7, because the company shouldn't be kind of turning on a dime that quickly, that often. It should be basically, here's what the company is, here's what the company's going to do, and then you implement the processes to allow it to be done, so that the decisions can be made when the decisions should be made by the appropriate folks to make the decisions.
Another question in for Code, wanting to know, when it comes to making investments, what do you look for in a CFO?
That's a good question. I think relevance to the team at the stage that they're at. So, in a startup, you've got limited resources, limited time, and most importantly, limited dollars. And, I guess my first question is, do you need a CFO at all, in terms of a full-time headcount? I'd personally rather hire a CTO than a CFO out of the gate. And so, having said that, if you're doing $10 or $20 million in revenue, then I think that a CFO is appropriate. So if you want to be the CFO early on, I think you have to wear another hat. And generally speaking, that's the COO hat. And so I see that a lot of the time, where you have a sort of financial background, but an operational mindset. And 80% of the time you're delivering on product, on sales, on engineering from an operational perspective. And the other 20% of the time you understand the finances and economics of the business. So you kind of wear two hats. I don't think that a pure 100% CFO makes sense at the early stage. And I want to carefully qualify that, right? At the earliest stage, it doesn't make sense to have a 100% CFO.
All right. Recognizing we're almost out of time here, for those we didn't get to in the questions, don't worry, we will get back to you. But I do want to have a few minutes to get final thoughts. This all began on the pretense that the Forbes article said there was a disconnect between the CEO and the CFO, and the role is changing. It's much more strategic, much more supportive, much more everything than just simply looking at the books, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to start with Corey. Corey, the question is this. With that as the premise, to your fellow CEOs or investors or company founders who are listening right now, what one piece of wisdom can you share or advice based on your own experience on that hire or that role around the CFO?
My personal opinion is when you're starting a business, get sales, validate your business model, earn the right to get to a growth stage so that you require the services experience of a seasoned CFO, and make sure that the person you bring on brings that counsel and wisdom and experience. Because I do agree with the premise that they are a partner to the business. They can't just be an accounting function, because that is not a CFO. That's a controller or an accountant or APAR. There are various different functions there. CFO is not something that folks, I think, should rush to. I think they need to get to validation, and they need to anchor their business in a place where it is a business. It's not just a startup or a company that's hoping to solve a problem and deliver a product and generate revenue, but you are doing that. And I think you will get to a point in time where a CFO will serve you very well as you grow your business.
Code, over to you. Final piece of wisdom or advice you can present as your role as an investor.
More of an observation on the Forbes article, and I think it's right. I think the fact is that the role of a CFO is changing, and in large part because of technology. I mean, I think if you look back 10, 20, 30 years, it took all of one person's time to truly understand the economics and finances of a business. And today, with things like SaaS-based accounting systems, with dashboarding companies that are aggregating in real time all of your relevant metrics, with those types of technical tools, the traditional, I hate to say this, Jason, don't be offended, but the bean counting part of what the finance group has historically done becomes less relevant. So I think that role, for lots of good reasons, the CFO has become essentially the understudy of the CEO. They're the backup, right? So when the CEO gets sick or removed, it's generally the CFO who's instantly prepared to take over that role. And so for that reason, I think the CFOs have to wear multiple hats. I think they have to be trained in multiple areas, and they have to be more general business people than just pure finance.
Final thoughts.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, when I define what I believe a CFO is, it's really that role of caretaker of the company strategy, which means that the CFO now needs to be able to interpret that strategy and be able to implement the processes and procedures that will allow you to achieve and most likely be able to achieve that strategy, bring to bear the people and the technology to help support the organization. And as Corey said, be a true partner to the organization. And as Code said, be that person who can be the Spock to the CEO's Captain Kirk and help the company become mostly successful. Finally, I agree with you 100%, Code, in that there's a commoditization that's happened to the general bookkeeping. It's one of the reasons why we offer full finance outsourcing, so that it can be done on a basis, because it is not that important to what the company's doing. It's something that's a little more commoditized, even though that was kind of the origins of the CFO role. I think now the true value of the CFO is in the business partnering and in providing insight and, more importantly, foresight into what the business is going to be doing in the future.
From the CFO to the CEO to Spock to Kirk, all we're missing is Batman and Robin, and the analogies are done. We've had a great time here, folks. Thanks to Code Cubit at Mistral Venture Partners. Thanks to Corey Gross, CEO at Sensible. And thank you to Jason Burke, partner at Positive Venture Group. For more information on these people, folks, by all means, check out their websites, follow them on social media, engage them, check them all out. There's a lot of great stuff, great wisdom here. Don't be shy. Use the email address. They've shared it willingly, so they're encouraging the involvement. In the meantime, we hope you had fun today, folks. We had a blast. If you like this, stay tuned, because we're going to do it again real soon. We're done here. You have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.